Hello. It's time for the video that you all have been asking me for since Mod 16 came out. A cleric guide. Yay! I figured it was fitting to make this video as my first real one since I got my channel back, because it just kinda sets the mood for the rest of the year, I think. This video is relevant through Mod 18, which is Avernus, and it'll eventually become outdated just like every video on my channel, so if you're watching this in any module after 18, make sure to verify that the things I say are still correct, which eventually they won't be. This video is only going to cover the Devout Paragon, which is the healing one. I don't play Arbiter very much at all, so I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to tell you how to play it, so I won't. I'm just going to explain everything I use when I'm healing, as well as the gear and stuff that I would like to have that I don't currently yet have, and then you can go from there and make any adjustments that you feel are necessary. As always, my guides are never meant to be taken as 100%. This is the absolute only way to go. It's simply a guidance because it's a guide, and then you can change it however you want. Anyways, I'll start off this guide the same way I've started all my other ones, which is by explaining the role of a Devout Cleric in a party. You're responsible for keeping everyone alive. The end. Seems simple enough. So we'll just go ahead and start with race. Ultimately, the race you choose is not going to matter very much, so just pick the one that you're not going to mind staring at for long periods of time, because you're going to be staring at it a lot. For most people, that's the end of the story, but for those of you who want to squeeze every last drop of effectiveness out of your cleric, the best races are Dragonborn, Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, and Half-Orc. Humans are okay too. But my cleric is a Sun Elf. Those races are the best because they allow you to pick your ability score bonuses, meaning you can take wisdom and dexterity or whatever it is that you're looking for. Basically, their bonuses are just good for clerics. Now, moving on to ability scores. Since you're going to be doing a lot of healing as a Devout Cleric, you'll want to primarily focus on wisdom for your ability scores, because wisdom increases your outgoing healing. The other important ability scores are dexterity and constitution, but constitution comes third. Dexterity and wisdom are the two best ones. Dexterity will increase your critical severity, which will increase your healing numbers whenever you crit a little bit, and Constitution is going to increase your max HP, which makes you a little bit tankier, meaning you can live and stuff and keep the other people alive. That's the plan. Moving right along, I don't want this video to be an hour long. We're going to talk about powers. The two at-wills that I use 99% of the time are Sacred Flame and Blessing of Light. Sacred Flame is a damaging one that I just use when I'm not using the other one, Blessing of Light, which Blessing of Light gives you 10% increase to your outgoing healing for the next 12 seconds, and this can be increased to 15% if you take the artifact modification bonus on your main hand weapon. You should get into the habit of using Blessing of Light in between everything that you do, that way it's always active and you will always have that passive 10 or 15% bonus outgoing healing. There are a lot of outgoing healing bonuses you can get for free as a cleric, as you'll see and learn by watching this video, so it's a good thing to take those. The only reason I chose Sacred Flame over Scattering Light is because it has the higher magnitude of the two at-wills. Although Scattering Light is an AoE at-will and will affect multiple enemies, whereas Sacred Flame is just one target enemy. But either way, the damage of either of them is not significant, and Sacred Flame has its own annoyances because it targets dead enemies sometimes. I just really wish that Devout Clerics had Lance of Faith. Moving on to encounters. I'm going to list all the encounters that I have found use for, pretty much the ones that I use most often, and we're going to start with Exaltation because Exaltation is a really good outgoing healing bonus. It actually increases your damage dealt and your outgoing healing by 20% for 8 seconds, and this is something that I usually keep up as much as possible. It is a cooldown power, so it doesn't cost divinity or anything like that. You can just use it once every 20 seconds or so, depending on how much cooldown reduction you have. If I know that a boss is going to be doing a big hit soon, or a mechanic that deals a lot of damage to everyone, like a damage over time type thing, what comes to mind, not for damage over time, but for big hits, is in Lair of the Mad Mage, the second boss where you all have to stack and deal with that electricity nonsense. I save this for that, although it is sometimes a longer series and you get to use this like 3 or 4 times throughout that whole mechanic. But next up is Bastion of Health, the #1 healing encounter for all clerics across the nation. Pretty much the only tip I have for this is to make sure that you get as many of your allies in the circle as possible whenever you're casting it, because then you have to cast it less. So, as a general rule, it's good to stay grouped up with your group, because then you'll save divinity, which is always a good thing. Speaking of divinity, when I first transitioned from Paladin to Cleric Healer, I did have a harder time getting around the divinity management thing, and divinity management gets a lot easier once you have higher outgoing healing. And it also helps if you're holding tab whenever you have a couple free seconds in combat. As a Devout, you're most likely not going to be dealing damage unless you're using damaging encounters for some reason, which some people do like to do. So it's okay if you're not doing damage all the time. So hold that tab every few seconds, make sure you get a little bit of divinity back, and you'll be good. Moving on to Intercession, or just going in order of things I use the most. So Intercession is a huge heal that heals the party member closest to you that has the least amount of hit points. It's not a targeted one, you don't have to look at the person that you're trying to heal, it just automatically picks the one closest to you that has the least hit points. This is really good for tanks. If your tank is just getting destroyed and they're about to die, you can press this button and poof, they have full health again if it crits. If it doesn't crit, you'll be able to get like 60% of their health back at once, and then you can follow up with a Bastion to top them off and, you know, all that jazz. But this is also a cooldown power, meaning that Bastion will be the only power that is draining your divinity, which is generally a good rule to only have one divinity power, so that your divinity usage is not ridiculous. Now next up, I want to talk about Healing Word, even though I don't use this power very much at all. It costs a lot of divinity, it lasts for a long time, but the heal is kind of like a heal over time. It heals every like few seconds for a moderate amount, and sometimes this can be useful in situations where the party has to spread out everywhere, such as in Tower of the Mad Mage or in the second boss of Infernal Citadel, when your tank is often farther away from the rest of your group, but it's not very convenient just because of the cost and the infrequency of the heal. So I often don't recommend people to use this very much. It is a good encounter, but if you overuse it, you will have no divinity ever. And that was my first mistake when I started really playing Healer Cleric in mod 17. I'm also going to touch on Cleansing Light. I use this one probably more frequently than Healing Word, although I still don't use it very much at all. And what this one does is it removes a negative condition from everybody who's targeted. It's targeted just like Bastion. It has a slightly different animation, and it will remove a negative condition like a burn or paralysis, although I have seen paralysis not getting removed properly, like your icon goes away, but then you still have the paralysis effect. I have seen that. Don't know if it's fixed yet. It will remove like burns and poison and stuff like that. Now the last encounter I'm going to talk about is Geas, and Geas is something that I only slot if I don't have need for Intercession. I always keep Exaltation and Bastion, and if I'm in a dungeon or something where the tank's doing really well or nobody's really taking any huge hits or ever falling below 50% health, I'll slot Geas instead. It'll decrease the target's damage by 5%, and then it will also do some decent damage to them as well. So it's my little way of contributing a little bit. Sometimes I'll also use Daunting Light here if we're in an area that has a lot of smaller monsters, but generally I just stick with Geas if I need to do any damage at all. That sums it up for encounters, so let's talk about dailies. There are actually 4 dailies of the 5 that I find useful in some situations, so we'll just go ahead and go right down the line. Number 1 most useful is Guardian of Life, especially if you have the feat that impacts Guardian of Life and Guardian of Faith, which I will talk about a little bit later. But Guardian of Life, it does a heal to everybody near you, and this is really good, especially, I think I've used this the most in Lair of the Mad Mage, in this second boss, just because if you're starting to run low on divinity, bam, everybody's more or less fully healed, and if you have the feat, they will also be kept healed for a little bit longer, allowing you to regenerate some divinity. Now, next up is Guardian of Faith, which is very similar to Guardian of Life. However, It just does a bunch of damage to one target, stuns things that are not control immune. Then again, if you have the feat, you'll also have that little bit of healing afterwards, just not the massive healing with the initial cast that Guardian of Life has. I usually save this if, for example, I'm in Tong and the souls are not dying, but nobody in my party's really dying, we just don't have the damage for the souls. I'll just slam that down on a soul and take care of at least one of them, so hopefully the bar doesn't fill up all the way, but that's what I use that for. Now, Anointed Army is something, this is the daily that was so 100% used all the time, 100% uptime and everything prior to mod 16, and then it kind of got destroyed, basically. The only thing this is used for now is taking the other feat that gives it a 3% damage bonus, and I only use that in groups that can just obliterate things, and I only use it in Tom. But other than that, I don't think of it as a safe daily to take. I think of dailies as like emergency buttons. So if I was to use that as an emergency button, it's very likely that the person is still going to die, whereas the other two will do at least some form of healing, and Guardian of Life will being the #1 choice. And lastly, Hallowed Ground. It does still have its use. It has a heal over time, and it reduces the damage that everyone in the circle takes by 10%. It's a very situational daily. It's not something that I use all the time anymore. Its area is a lot smaller than it used to be, but it does have its uses. It's situational, and you will know whenever you're in that kind of situation if there's a certain attack that a boss is doing that just wipes your party. Maybe consider slotting this in for an attempt. That about sums it up for the dailies, so let's go ahead and move on to class features. There are only 4 of these that I'm going to touch on. The other 4 I never use at all, but the 2 that I use the most are Overflowing Spirit and Desperate Prayers. Overflowing Spirit increases your outgoing healing by 25% when your divinity is full. Now, if you have good divinity management, really high outgoing healing, so you're not using that much divinity, and you're channeling divinity in combat, you should have this up a decent amount of the time. Not 100% of the time, because you are going to be using your divinity to heal and stuff, but it is a really good boost. Now, Desperate Prayers is the opposite. If your divinity is below half, you get 20% outgoing healing. Well, not right away. It increases as it approaches 0. So if you're like right at 0, you'll have 20% outgoing healing, and then it'll be less than that as you fall below half. So basically it's like, well, I'm getting kind of desperate. I hope this heals them now. Another good one to look at is Hallowed Guide. I don't use this very often. Only really whenever I don't have need for Desperate Prayers, like if I'm in a dungeon where I've never really fall below half divinity, I will slot this instead. That gives me an extra 5% bonus healing if the people are close to me, which they always are. So I will slot that there. And then the last one, the only other one that I use is Hallowed Armor, and I mainly only use this one in Tom. It gives me 5% less damage taken from all sources and 10% less damage taken whenever I'm channeling divinity. And this is really good for staying alive if you're in a situation where you're dying and stuff. Okay, so as you can see, I form a nice W with my chosen feats. These are the ones that I've pretty much used since these kind of feats came out. The first one being Repeated Blessings. This is the healing word one. I only picked it because I don't use Soothe ever. Soothe is the healing at will that I don't like at all. But most of the time this feat is doing nothing for me. But if you are using Healing Word, this feat basically makes it so that if you heal somebody with Healing Word and then heal them afterwards with an encounter or a daily, the Healing Word's duration is extended by 6 seconds. It basically makes it last longer, so that you don't have to cast it as often, which is great if you're using Healing Word. Now next is the one that I always went for, Battle Prayer, which basically makes it so that whenever you use encounter powers that cost divinity, you restore more divinity by channeling divinity. I tried out Rhythm of the Heavens, but I never got... I didn't like it very much. Basically, this one, you just channel divinity, and then if you release the channeling while the Rhythm of the Heavens is active, you restore some bonus divinity. I never really got the rhythm of this rhythm, and so I just never picked it. Now, next up, I have Blessed Armaments, only because Towering Light is not for me. This one, Towering Light just flatly increases your damage by 10% and decreases as you run out of divinity, whereas Blessed Armaments makes Divine Glow and Exaltation reduce your damage taken by 10%. That's the main thing here. So Exaltation I have up as much as possible, which is nice. 10% less damage taken. I'll die less. Wonderful. Now the next feat choice is the ones for the dailies. The Anointed Arms one goes with the Anointed Army daily that I talked about earlier, gives the affected allies 3% bonus damage. Like I said, I only use that in very specific situations, and I have a specific loadout specifically for that. How many times can I say specific in one sentence? Anyway, Persistent Guardian is the main one here. I also talked about this a little bit earlier, and this one affects Guardian of Faith and Guardian of Life. So if you use those with this feat, the Guardian will stay and heal the party members every few seconds, which is nice if you're trying to recover divinity or something. It only lasts for a short time, but it can really be a lifesaver. Now, lastly but not leastly, Light of Devotion. This one is like 20 million times better than Angel of Life, because Angel of Life takes like 50 years to activate, and by the time it activates, you're not in combat anymore, or the stuff's all dead and it's just useless. Light of Devotion is good because you're gonna be channeling divinity in combat anyways, and every 4 seconds that you're doing it, you gain a stack of this Light of Devotion, which increases your outgoing healing of the next encounter power you use by 5%. More outgoing healing, it's free. Why not take it, you know? Okay, my mouth is tired already of talking, and I'm only like 30% done. So next, let's talk about stats, because that is something that is very important for clerics, and everyone really, I guess. But the main stats that you should be focusing on are power, outgoing healing, and critical strike. Those are the top 3. Power because it increases your healing numbers, crit because healers need approximately 125% of their power number as crit, which as you can see I obviously do not have, and this is because of some weird math formula that I don't understand, but if you are interested in reading about it, there's a link in the description that probably explains it better than I could try to. So yes, ideally you will want to have 125% of your power as crit. I'm not even close, but I also haven't really had any problems with keeping people alive in any content. This is an ideal number, it's not a necessary number. People at the endgame level like to make you think that this kind of thing is 100% necessary, but it's actually not. It's necessary to an ideal 100% maxed character, but a lot of us are never going to reach that point, myself included. Now, outgoing healing, most of this bonus will come from companions, and also ideally you'll want to have over 40%, which I also don't have. If I switched out one companion, I would have it, but that's besides the point. As far as defense goes, you do want to cap defense and get as many hit points as possible. Critical avoidance is also interesting for clerics. You need more than the cap because clerics have a bonus. Clerics have divine protection, which means that your critical avoidance is increased by up to 10,000 as your divinity is full. So as you're losing divinity, you're also losing critical avoidance. So that 10,000 there is free. So I actually only have 74,000 critical avoidance. So this means that if you want to have critical avoidance crapped all the time, you will need 95,000 because that's the cap for mod 18. There's also a link to a spreadsheet in the description that has all the stat caps and a whole bunch of other information with companions and mounts and stuff that you might find useful. But really, there's not that many stats that healers need to focus on. You're not going to need armor penetration or accuracy or combat advantage, so that leaves plenty of room for putting stats into other categories. Like I said, my stats are far from perfect as far as crit and power and outgoing healing go, but it has been doable. Like, I've been able to do all the content with it without any problems, and so I'm okay with it, which is pretty much what your goal should be. You want to reach a point where you can do content and not run out of divinity and be able to keep everyone alive. Whether those stat numbers are what the super endgame elite people tell you they are, or if they're what you feel is good, that doesn't matter. Just as long as you're able to perform well, then you're good. I'm sure I'll get a lot of hate comments for that statement. Okay, now let's look at boons. Starting with the Guild Stronghold boons, you'll want Power, HP, and the Revive Sickness boon, or the Movement Speed one if you're not in a dungeon, but that's pretty much the staple. If you need defense, there's also defense, there's critical avoidance, awareness boons. Just go with what your guild has and what you need. You can switch them at any time, so it's up to you, really. Now, campaigns. The campaign boons are one of the biggest disappointments, I feel like, since mod 16 came out. There's like no real interesting boons. But just as a general rule of thumb, you'll want to take all the training ones because those are power, all of the hit point ones to help you stay alive better, movement speed because moving speed faster is gooder. Sorry, I'm tired, I'm running out of word mouths. Companion influence just because that will give you a little bit of extra stats. And we're going to talk about companions in a second. And then after that, you can pick whatever stats you need help capping. I went for critical avoidance. I have a couple in defense, but I don't really need this anymore. So at that point, I would probably put it into the demonic mastery just because mod 18 has a lot of demons in it. So having some extra damage resistance versus demons would be pretty helpful. Now, as far as the tier 5 boons, there are 3 here that I feel like are worth looking at for clerics, and that is action point gain, outgoing healing, and critical severity. I, as you can see, took action point gain and outgoing healing. I've seen a lot of people go for outgoing healing and critical severity. That's fine too, but I like having my little bit of bonus action point gain. Now, as far as master boons go, the main one that you'll want to pick up is Blessed Advantage. You can only pick one here, and this one I feel is the best because it increases the people's power and it reduces their ability cooldowns whenever you heal them. Blessed Resilience is okay too, but the main attraction of this one is just healing stamina, and that is mainly beneficial for tanks. So it kind of just depends on your situation, but most of the time Blessed Advantage will be your best choice. Okay, now let's talk about companions, where I also don't have everything that I technically should, but I have what I feel like I need. So, as a starter, you should have an augment companion as your summoned companion, ideally with the maximum bolster of 15%, but that is something that you can reach for later. The main thing that you should be looking at is that you have an augment as your summoned companion. This is because you get all of the augment stats added to your own, and then bonding runestones apply on top of that, and rank 15 bonding runestones give you 70% of your companion stats times 3, which is 210% plus 100% of their base stats, which is 310% of their stats. Hit points not included. It's also kind of good to look at the enhancement that augments have. I chose the Quasi because it has power as one of its enhancement things, meaning that I get a little bit of extra power from it. Not a lot, but a little bit. Now, looking at companion equipment, I do need to swap around a little bit because I have 2 older pieces of gear on here, and I feel like I could get a lot more stats if I just did a couple different things, but mainly I have the gold icon just for a lot of extra critical strike. As you can see, I have 24,000 crits on my companion right now, and this translates to whatever 310% of 24,000 is. Basically a lot. And this is the main way that you'll be able to cap crit as a healer if you are going for that 125% thing. It'd be to have this and then another crit one, I believe, would get you there. I have crit on here, I've got some defense, some awareness. I don't want the awareness, I would like to have defense and critical avoidance with 2 offense slots. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist as far as I know. And I also have more critical avoidance and deflection, which I don't want. So my gear is not perfect, but it gets the job done, so that's all I really care about. And I'll talk about the runestones whenever we get to the enchantment section in a little bit. But looking at bonuses, this purple enhancement one, it's there's 2 good options, and one of them is armor break that I have here, and then there's also potent precision, which will increase your critical severity, which will give you even more a little bit extra healing. I have armor break equipped because I don't actually have potent precision, which kind of sucks. And as far as the other powers go, you'll want to fill them all with outgoing healing in an ideal situation. It is possible to have all 5 of these filled with outgoing healing, max 10% bonus on each of them. That is 50% outgoing healing, which is fantastic. However, it is okay to have 4 or even 3. I have 3 right now. If I made it 4, eventually I'll want to switch out this 8,000 power one with an outgoing healing one and then upgrade these 3 to legendary. That will put me at about 50% outgoing healing, 51% or so, and I think that's more than enough. And then I also have some hit points here because I like having lots of hit points. If I took a hit points mount power bonus, I would have over 400,000 hit points, or at least very close to it. and that is my ideal life right there. Some of the outgoing healing companions can get very expensive, so don't expect to be able to get them right away. If you need something to put in those slots until you get outgoing healing, just look at your stats and look at this spreadsheet and figure out which you are not capped on and put something in there that boosts it. Okay, now on to mounts. Ideally, you'll want to have, again, this isn't an ideal situation, you'll want to have 10,000 power as your mount power here, which I actually don't have, so I don't have it equipped. But power and HP are both good to slot here, so whichever one you have, use, but ideally power is better. You can even put crit in here if you're having trouble with that. Good combat powers are ones that debuff the enemies like the T-Rex or the Swarm, but this is something that you will not get right away, so just really don't worry about it until you're getting close to what would be considered endgame. Now, looking at Insignias and Insignia bonuses. Insignias are a place where you can cap the stats that are not capped, or you can stack even more power. It really depends on what you need. So don't spend a lot on Insignias right away because you'll end up needing to change them out and it gets super annoying. But most of mine are dominance and brutality, and then I also have some courage as well for defense and critical avoidance, since those are the stats that I don't have capped. Blue Insignias are good enough to get the job done for most things. Once you get closer to endgame, you will want to upgrade to purple just so that you have more stats, and then orange ones are just like ultimate whenever you don't have money to spend on anything else, or you open a pack and get them, then you use that. But as far as bonuses go, Gladiator's Gale. I learned how to pronounce this today, and it's weird that it's pronounced Gale, but it is. Basically, more movement speed. Oppressor's Reprieve is good. I like it because whenever you get stunned or knocked up in the air, you heal a little bit, which is nice because you're usually stunned for a decent amount of time and you don't want to die and stuff. The heal is not significant, but it's enough usually to keep you on your feet. Shepherd's Devotion. This one, I only have this one slotted because it gives 10% movement speed to allies whenever I use it daily, and it also has room for 3 dominance insignias, which is nice. I also use Barbarian's Revelry, which heals me whenever I perform a critical strike, also good. And then lastly, but not leastly, Artificer's Persuasion. I usually have 2 cooldown powers equipped, so having this will reduce the cooldowns a little bit. This one is not necessary since a lot of the time you're using the artifacts at the beginning of a fight to start it off, so at that point this bonus is useless, but I do get use for it sometimes and I don't really feel like changing it out to something else, and so that is what I use. If you don't need these or don't have these, you can slot in Wanderer's Fortune for some extra refinement points, or put in a second Gladiator's Gale for more movement speed, or a second Oppressor's Reprieve or whatever. However, each duplicate one that you slot in will be half effectiveness. So for example, Gladiators is 10% bonus movement speed, so the second one that you put in here will only give you an additional 5, and so on. Okay, now let's talk about gear. I'm not going to talk too long about gear because a lot of the time it's very subjective and depends on what you have access to getting as well, so I'm just going to talk about what I have and what I would like to have, and then you can go from there. So, the best weapons are the Lionheart ones, and that is because they have the most stats on them, and they give you bonus 10% outgoing healing when your stamina is full, which should be a lot of the time. However, I only have one of these. I haven't bothered to complete the set, so a good alternative, one that you will be, is going to be a lot more attainable, is Burnished. And this one gives you increased power, 5% increased power whenever you heal yourself, or someone else heals you, or you get smacked into oblivion. You get the point. And that extra power will increase your healing a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. The Lionheart ones come from Tower of the Mad Mage, which is the most difficult content in the game, and you will have a very hard time reaching the point to getting into it, let alone actually getting into it and completing it, so it's a good thing is to shoot for Burnished, and Burnished comes from Lair of the Mad Mage, which is a dungeon that is not super difficult, so you should be able to complete this one a lot more easily than Tom. Okay, so helmet. I'm currently wearing a Crown of the Lost King, which gives me some power when I'm in combat with one enemy. This is not the best helmet. I would prefer to have the Lion Guard's helmet, which gives you 5,000 power when your stamina is over 75%. which would be most of the time. But this one is a good alternative until I can get that, and also the Fancy Duelist Mask of Cormyr is just a better version of this. It gives me 5,000 power when I'm in combat with one enemy instead of 2,000, so that also comes from Undermountain expeditions as well. Now, armor. I'm wearing Gurdun's Defense, which is something that you can get pretty early on in Undermountain if you're doing expeditions, and I'm still wearing it only because I don't like the bonus on any other chest piece. A lot of them are like increasing your defense or deflecting damage or stuff like that. None of them are really offensive bonuses on the chest armor, so I haven't switched, and I don't plan on it until something actually good comes along. Next up is arms. I'm currently wearing Crash Guards. I would like to replace these as well. I would like the Lion's Guard ones just because they have more stats on them, they're newer. And also, as with all of the armor here, I have the 880 modification with the armor kits. It's called like Major Power Reinforcement Kit or something like that. I don't remember. And you can buy them on the auction house. Gives you a little bit of extra power. You can also do hit points as well if you're interested in that. Now, boots. I'm wearing Trapper of the Twilight's boots, which just increase movement speed. They don't do anything with power or anything like that. I'm wearing them because they were better than what I was wearing before, which I don't even remember what they were at this point, but I would like to have the Lion's Guard just for that power bonus. Anyways, moving on to neck and waist. This is where it gets a tiny bit more complicated, and only because I'm not using an actual set here. We're using the Woven Vine neck piece only for the stats, otherwise I would switch it to something else. And then for my waist, I have the Sash of Embellishments, which is from the Tales of Old set. And I'm wearing this because it gives you an extra ability score point. So having two of these journals here, I'm wearing the Sash of Embellishments because it gives me an extra ability score point, which gives me 1 extra point into wisdom that is not shown here because I'm not at a campfire. I don't have my campfire buff on, so otherwise all of these would be 1 higher. That's the only reason I'm wearing it. Now, rings, I'm using the cheap alternatives to the good rings. Ideally, I would be having the Striking Ring of the Veteran, which each of these would then have 20,000 crit on them, which would bring me a lot closer to having a lot of crit. However, these rings cost like 3.5 million, and the bonus on them only applies to melee damage, and clerics don't have any melee attacks. So that bonus would then be kind of useless. So basically the poor man's alternative are the Budding Rings of Ivy. These are like 35k or something on the auction house, and they give me almost 12,000 crit, and that's good enough for me. Now, shirt and pants. Ideally, I'd be wearing the Shirt of the Champion because it has 4k crit on it, and the Pants of the Veteran, which have 4k critical avoidance on them. I don't want any of the Infernal Forged pieces because their bonuses aren't very appealing to me, especially the pants, and there's no 4k stat versions of them, so still wearing Protege right now. Now, artifacts. Like I touched on, I'm using 2 journals from the Tales of Old set because it gives me 1,000 power, well 2,000 because they increase for each journal that's equipped, and also gives me extra hit points, which is super nice. And then I also have 2 of the newer artifacts that have 3k power apiece on them. And this one's more defensive, critical avoidance and defense, and this one has critical strike, which is something that I need as well. For your primary artifact, you'll want to use a damage buff artifact, an example being the Frozen Storyteller's Journal, the Wyvern Coated Knives, the Lantern of Revelation, Hallister's Blast Scepter. There's a whole bunch of different ones that will increase damage dealt, or enemy damage taken, which are all good options. Alright, now enchantments. Since we talked about how important power is, it should go without saying that all of your offense slots should have Radiance in them. You shouldn't need to put any crit in your offense stats, and if you do, make it a brutal so it's power and crit, but really just go with all Radiance and you should be fine. As far as defense slots go, I have Black Ice in all mine because I've had Black Ice in all mine for many mods and I never changed them. But you can put Radiance in there too to increase your hit points, which will give you more survivability, or just put whatever defense stat you need to cap, like critical avoidance, for example. And then in utility, you have a couple of options. Tactical are the best ones because it increases your incoming healing, meaning you'll get healed more whenever you heal yourself or someone heals you. I have some dark enchantments in here. Dark enchantments are not going to give you very much. Really what they do is they give you more stats from your companion, but you're not actually getting that much, only like a few thousand if you have a few of them. But I still have them and it's fine. But your other option is to go for refinement-based ones like the Timora's Lucky Coin, or no, Timora's Lucky Enchantment, the Dragon Horde Enchantment, or the Fey Blessing, and things like that. That'll give you some extra refinement points if you're trying to build up your weapons or your artifacts and stuff. Now, your runestones that you put on your companion, in an ideal situation, you'll want to have 6 maxed empowered runestones. I have 5 because I do have 1 defense slot, and in that I put an enigmatic for critical avoidance, since I need critical avoidance. Having defense slots on your companion is not terrible, but it is best to have offense ones so that you can have a lot of power. And last but not leastly, overload slots. I keep mine empty a lot of the time, but something good to put in here is the Greater White Dragon Glyphs, because whenever this is active, you get 10% bonus healing. It's only active about 33% of the time, but hey, a bonus is a bonus. A free bonus is a bonus. These do eventually wear out though, and you'll have to replace them, but they're not super expensive. I don't keep these slotted very often, only if I'm going into something that I think I might be in over my head a little bit, then I might put these on just so that I have that little bit of an extra bonus in there. One thing that I forgot to mention, I think I talked about the modification on the main hand weapon for Blessing of Light, but the offhand one, I have power and companion influence in there, but you can also go for hit points or critical strike if you need that. And then for the other one, another good one to go for would be critical severity, 10% critical severity. That's probably the one that I should have instead of 5% companion influence, but hey, whatever you want to do. All right, hopefully this video is less than 30 minutes long, although I think that's very unlikely. If you made it this far, congratulations, here's a round of applause. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching or listening or whatever. Hopefully you learned at least one thing from this video. I do have a cleric tips video if you're interested in learning a little bit more. There's, I think, 5 tips for Devout and 2 for Arbiter in that video, so you can check that out if you want some more sweet cleric content. But that's all I have for you today, and I guess I will see you later. Okay, bye.